Assalamualaikum. I'm Umefisa Abdo. I'm an MBBS graduate and I do part-time teaching, particularly of science subjects. So here we go. Today I wanted to talk about respiratory physiology, but for that to understand, I had to give some of the basic ideas of how the exchange of the gases is taking place. So for that, I wanted to discuss the transport system of the cell. So here's this topic: movement of materials in and out of the cell. Now, any living organism is made up of cells, right? And these cells, either one or trillions, they need a specific environment and surrounding for their survival and for keep going on till their death. So for that, cell has to undergo some of the changes, some of the exchange for the survival. As we are discussing here, there's a cell which undergoes a transport system. Now there are three transport systems. Just a minute. One is diffusion, second is osmosis, third is active transport. Okay, now these are three transport systems in which our cells are exchanging material. Okay, they are removing the material, the waste product from their inside, and getting inside what is necessary for them. Okay, so for diffusion, the respiration is important to understand. What is respiration? The respiration term is being used as a metabolic process or a biochemical process in which glucose is being utilized and ATP is formed, which is obviously energy currency of the cell, in order to keep the body going. Okay, so we all know about this equation as so we have this universal equation that we use always to describe the respiration. It is glucose when reacts with oxygen that we inhale. At the end we would get carbon dioxide and water as byproduct. Okay, so this is explaining diffusion too, how in our cells there's glucose. Okay, now this glucose is breaking down in the presence of oxygen, which is getting inside the cell. Okay, and at the end of the day, this oxygen reaction with the glucose will lead to formation of carbon dioxide and water. This water would be then recycled for different metabolic processes of the body, and this carbon dioxide will get removed from the cell. Now what happens? There is need of oxygen to get inside the cell and need of carbon dioxide which is being manufactured inside the cell to get out of the cell. Okay, just to get it going. For that to understand, diffusion is very important. Now to explain diffusion, I'm taking one of the cells. Okay, this is a cell, and we all know that animal cells are typically having cell membrane, which is lipid bilayer. Lipid bilayer in a sense because it has two ends, a hydrophilic end on outer side and a hydrophobic side which is on inside. This is the structure of the cell membrane. Now ऐसे समझ लें, I have taken this part and I have made it here. Okay, so inside the cell there are different processes. There's mitochondria, nucleus and everything, but this is cell membrane which is taking part in diffusion processes. Now diffusion happens when there is use of oxygen, and for that oxygen has to get inside, and when this oxygen is being used with the glucose, it would make carbon dioxide, right? And this carbon dioxide would get out of the cell. That means there is a lot of concentration which is being made inside the cell, right? So for example, I'm making the cell here which is undergoing respiration constantly. I'm not writing or drawing any of the organelles, just to explain. So these are carbon dioxide molecules, and I am drawing oxygen molecules in red just to differentiate. So you can see the difference, that there are a lot of carbon dioxide molecules inside, and oxygen molecules are not comparatively that much on outside. Then what happens, these carbon dioxide molecules, because these are higher in concentration on inside of the cell membrane, we have to see the fact that on either side of the cell membrane, what is the concentration of the molecules. Diffusion always takes place when they're from higher concentration towards the lower concentration. Okay, so if we are talking about diffusion of carbon dioxide, the diffusion would take place from inside to outside, because carbon dioxide is more on inside and lesser on outside. So apparently carbon dioxide would move out. Okay, now oxygen is not that much on outside. These are oxygen molecules, and some of them would be obviously inside because it's an ongoing process. There's no any pause, there's no any stop between the processes. So apparently there are few of the molecules of oxygen too, but there is more concentration on outside of the cell membrane. That's why the transport of the oxygen would be from outside towards the inside, because again here is the higher concentration and here is the lower concentration of oxygen. So what happens, if we are talking about diffusion of oxygen, we would say that there would be movement of the molecules from higher concentration towards the lower concentration. That means from outside to inside, right? And this is all happening just to get ATP, which is cellular currency. Because in future we would be studying about some of the transport systems and how the body works, the physiology, they all need ATP. Okay, because diffusion does not only keep the cell going. And another point is the transport system that I categorized were three, right? One was diffusion, another was osmosis, and third was active transport. So I would say that diffusion would only take place when there is gaseous substances. Okay, so diffusion happens in gases. Osmosis is moreover related with the water. Okay, water or liquid solvents we can say. And active transport, we talk about transport of solutes or ions, you can say, because apparently in future I would be discussing about osmosis. So I hope the diffusion part is clear here, because this is always this diffusion gets. Acha, one point is that the process which keep this diffusion going is, I told you there should be concentration difference. Okay, so for that to happen, concentration difference should be a lot. Okay, if you want diffusion to happen easily and rapidly, it is necessary when there is a lot of difference between two gases concentration. Just a minute. Okay, so this thing that depends on concentration, we call it concentration gradient. Okay, so we would say that concentration gradient is a thing which is causing diffusion process. A cell, a lot of carbon dioxide molecules on inside, a few on outside. Transport would be from outside to inside to outside. Okay. Another, oxygen molecules, more on outside, a few on inside. Transport would be from outside to inside. Now if we are making this collectively, okay, because a normal cell contains more of carbon dioxide on inside and a few on outside, and at the same time there are a very little molecules of oxygen on inside and a lot on outside. So the final results would be movement of carbon dioxide outside, movement of oxygen inside. Okay, due to concentration gradient, difference of concentrations. Now another thing is the diffusion depends on few of the things. Okay, in order to do it more quickly and efficiently, there are certain things that we have to provide if we want diffusion to happen so quickly. These are surface area of substance or the cell membrane, which the oxygen and carbon dioxide has to get through. Now this is when there is higher surface area, there would be more quickly diffusion. Okay, and higher surface area, I would say that smaller objects have higher surface area. Then another thing is distance. This is a cell, for example, and this is cell membrane which I am indicating, and gases are here. Okay, and another cell is here, cell membrane is here, and another molecules are here which are getting an exchange opportunity or getting in opportunity. Now what do you think, which substances would get inside more quickly or would get diffused more quickly? This one, right? Because the distance is greater here. When there is a lot of distance, there would be a lot of time required for substances or the gases to travel till the level of membrane. Then another factor is volume. You can consider volume and the distance as same, because when there is a lot of volume, it would take a lot of time for diffusion to take place. So that means slow diffusion. Okay. Another factor is temperature. When there is a lot of temperature within the molecules which are being diffused, there would be easy or fast diffusion. Okay, because there is kinetic energy in between the molecules which is keeping them so movable to get inside the cell. Okay, same was the case when with the carbon dioxide. When it was inside, it has a lot of kinetic energy because the molecules are in constant motion, providing energy, providing pressure. Okay, and another thing would be concentration gradient, on which diffusion depends. This concentration gradient I have explained before. So more the concentration gradient, easy would be the diffusion. That means कि carbon dioxide, if there is a lot of difference, which means कि अगर हमारे पास we have 4 molecules of oxygen inside, and for example we have 5 molecules or 6 molecules of oxygen outside, there is no much difference. Okay, there is no big of a difference which can keep the molecules from outside to inside. But at the same time, if we make a cell and we are giving 4 molecules on inside, and for example we are giving almost 20 or 25 molecules on outside, there would be a lot of difference. So difference of the molecule would do easy diffusion, and the oxygen molecules would diffuse inside. Okay, so this is concentration gradient. More the difference, more easy and more faster would be the diffusion. Okay, now we have osmosis. For understanding of osmosis, I have to explain one of the qualities of cell membrane, which is selectively permeability. Okay, this is one of the roles that cell membrane in animal cell membrane do. So it does. So this is cell membrane. As the gases were diffusing without any selectivity, it is completely different when it comes to the liquids or to ions or some other substances like glucose. Okay, so that is why we call it selective permeability, because the cell is choosing things, that what things are getting inside and what are going outside. So apparently it all depends on that what the cell wants. If cell is starving of water, it would allow water. Okay, so this, and if it has already excess of water, it won't get in any of the water molecules. So this is selective permeability. And the more I would say a good example would be, for example, glucose. They don't just get the glucose inside. There is a transport system for that too. So apparently they have to go through some of the processes. Here we are talking about osmosis, and for osmosis I have to explain the difference between dilute solution and concentrated solution. You must have some of the idea of chemistry too. Okay, so here we are taking a beaker, and for example we are taking water till this level. I'm making water molecules with these. Okay, these are water molecules, and I'm putting some of the salt with yellow. Okay, I'm putting some of the salt. You would define this solution as dilute solution, because dilute solution always has large amount of solvent and less amount of solute. Salt is solute here. So this would be dilute solution. If you're talking about concentrated solution, what happens? I'm making a beaker again. Consider it as the same size. Okay, same level of water, same amount of water. Okay, same amount of water, but at the same time I'm putting a lot of salt, which is even more than water. Okay, so what do you think now? Is it dilute or concentrated? You would say this is a concentrated solution because it has more of solutes and solvent amount is very less. Okay, so osmosis, for osmosis to happen, there should be presence of any of these solutions. Okay, osmosis का basic मकसद है, we have to get the water transported in between the cell membrane, inside and outside. Okay, लेकिन ये ऐसे ही नहीं होगा. Just a minute. If we are taking a cell here, this is cell membrane, this one, and we have to transport water molecules inside and outside. There would be a lot of water there would be some inside. Okay, and our cells also have some of the salts too. So if there are some of the salts, or you can say a lot of salts, we're considering here as a more of salts. So what is the dilute side and what is the concentrated side? This one would be dilute side, this one would be concentrated side. Okay, I'm not talking about the transport of solutes here. Solutes cannot move through the membrane, they need a special system for transport. I'm talking about water here. Okay, so there is dilute solution and there is concentrated solution. Now water that is present on outside, it would get dragged inside because of the solutes inside. Okay, so water would pull all the water molecules, solutes will pull all the water molecules which are present on outside of the cell membrane and drag inside. So this is why the difference of the solutes is needed. Okay, and similarly this osmosis also follows the rules of diffusion too, because apparently if we are talking about there is an equal amount of the solutes and then there is an equal amount of water on either side, there will be no transport capable. As there is one of the lines from IGCSE, water moves across the cell membrane by a special sort of diffusion. Okay, it is also a form of diffusion called as osmosis. Now osmosis happens when the total concentration of all dissolved substances inside and outside the cells are different. Okay, so the salt molecules I mentioned, salt of course contains sodium as well as chloride, so these are different amount of or different type of solutes which are getting dissolved inside the cell membrane, water. So water will move across the membrane from one dilute solution to the more concentrated one. This is still obeying the rules of diffusion as the water moves from where there is higher concentration of the molecules of water to the lower concentration, right? So I hope the osmosis part is clear. And as I told before, that diffusion happens in gases and osmosis happens with liquids. Now another transport system is active transport. Up till now diffusion and osmosis were also somehow working because of the differences of concentration, right? What happens, I'm giving an example of if a cell who has very little of glucose inside, very little, that it is barely surviving, and there is a lot of glucose molecules which are residing on outside, what happens now? I mean, I know there is a lot of concentration difference, lekin I also told you that glucose cannot just randomly go through the cell membrane. It needs a special system, it needs protein. So here, this is when active transport comes. What happens? This is cell. I'm taking this membrane here. Okay, this membrane is having special proteins. Okay, our cell membranes are having special protein pumps, you can say. Okay, these protein pumps are somehow attached with some of the enzymes on their inside. This is so deep, so I would keep it superficial with the idea. So they consider this as a sodium potassium pump or any pump. Okay, any pump. Now glucose if you're taking normally what happens that glucose needs these pumps to get inside the cell, because glucose is a large molecule, it cannot just diffuse inside the cell membrane. And plus another reason is also selective permeability, it cannot let the glucose inside. So what happens, this pump system is here. And also there is concentration gradient, but in previous cases what we were talking about is more of the concentration gradient, and there would be higher to lower transport, okay, from higher the movement of the molecules, gaseous molecules or water molecules, from higher concentration to the lower concentration, right? But in here in active transport, the transport would be from lower concentration towards the higher concentration. This is why we call is that glucose is getting transported against its concentration gradient. Why? Because there is a lot of amount of glucose on outside than inside, but this is not the energy of the glucose which is dragging it inside, okay? This is because of these pumps. And also the little of the glucose which is being used inside the cell, or which was made by the cell, because obviously respiration is a constant process, and this glucose is needed for ATP formation, and this same ATP is getting used for the activity of these pumps, okay? So basically we can say that diffusion, osmosis, active transport, these transport systems are directly or indirectly linked with each other, okay? So I firstly told you that diffusion में क्या हो रहा था, that there was going in of oxygen, okay, inside the cell, and little of the glucose which was inside of the cell, it was getting reacted with the glucose, and apparently we had carbon dioxide and water. Lekin we also had ATP, okay, powerhouse of the cell, from the powerhouse of the cell, which is mitochondria. So that ATP which we got, let me mention these, okay, reaction of the oxygen with the glucose. I'm not equalizing the equation here, okay, so just giving a idea of how it is working, the system and the process is working, okay? Carbon dioxide, water, and we also had ATP, okay? So what we got, important things, carbon dioxide would get ultimately out of the cell, okay, so this is of no use, and water and ATP more important. Now this ATP is needed again for this active process to get in the glucose from outside to inside, because this ATP is needed by these pumps, okay? So here is an enzyme which uses ATP. Without ATP it won't open any of the pumps, and apparently no glucose would get inside the cell. So finally, what is the idea of the active transport? It is when there is movement of the ions, or okay, yes, active transport can also happen with the ions or solutes, but I'm talking here about glucose because it is a larger molecule and apparently more familiar to everyone. So glucose is moving against its concentration gradient, which is the reason why this ATP is being used. I hope these all three transport systems are clear now. Okay. Thank you.